Your next question, what are some inherently discriminatory and not so progressive laws that could use some work in Guyana?
Well, we all know of the big one, which is the buggery law. And there are two debates to that. Some people are like, oh, but you don't really use the buggery law to penalize anyone. The mere fact that that law still exists and just targets a particular group of people should say something. And many people use that law to justify homophobia. That ties into my first question, was talking about how we're excluded as a society. Yes, we know of homophobia, we know of conservatism and religion, which drives that exclusion. But some people would say, oh, but the law says, and I don't understand why people look at the law's morality when every single Guyanese at one point, their identity was criminalized. Black people were not even seen as people or property. Indian persons were just contractual obligations. Indigenous persons were discriminated and looked as childlike, uncivilized people. So it just goes to show that we shouldn't look at that law and uphold it, but that's the most obvious one. My answer to that question would actually be the lack of laws and policies that we have to protect the community. I mean, there are advocates in Ghana working towards including sexual orientation and gender identity in the Prevention of Discrimination Act. Because the reality is, Chris did mention some of us have the privilege of knowing when and how to come out at work. We have to assess that risk because for some, if we do come out at work, we get fired. And there's no way we can go to the court and say we've been fired for being gay. It's just not recognized. It's not seen. And that's a major deficit. And it goes with healthcare. You're discriminated, you're harassed if you're accessing healthcare. Where do you find protection? Other than, of course, you might find a policy here and there, but that's not legally binding, is it? And many factors in society when it comes to housing, persons are kicked out even as children. Where's our protection when it concerns our social access and social equity? So my answer to that is the lack of laws and protection. We just don't have any because we're not seen as people. Society just didn't consider us as, and trust me, if you go to many places in Guyana, I remember meeting in Region 6, and some persons did stand up and say, oh, there are no gay people here in Region 6. There are none. And then many politicians would even consider to say being gay is just a foreign invention that, we're trying to impose on Guyanese society. It's not so. I mean, we exist, we're here, we're queer. And it's just, we need these laws, not only for them to be revoked and then to be written off, but new laws to protect our identities and our place in societies. And can I mention, we did have a law, such as law, like straight off the book. Everyone knows the cross-dressing law and the history of that and what happened, It was targeted towards transgender persons, just trans women, just there in society. Police used it to target them. They took them to court and the CCJ was like, strike those laws off. They're not relevant to today's society. They find no place here. And that was just so brilliant. And I think that sets a precedence not only for the similar laws in the region, but for the buggery laws if we were to take that to court. We're just waiting on someone to take it to court at this point, because sure enough, the government won't strike it down by themselves.
Well articulated, Gyro. That is definitely a concern, a huge concern, which I think needs to be addressed as soon as possible. We need to feel safe, and leaders should provide that safety for their people. So I have an open question and it has 3 parts. I would advise every member of the panel to participate in each part or one part. It's questions on how to respond. The first one is, what should I do if I think someone is lesbian, gay, bisexual, or transgender, but they haven't told me yet?
I think the best way to answer that, give them time. There's nothing else to do but give them time. You give them time, through your actions, you can show them that you love them unconditionally. through your actions, you can show them that you're supportive of the LGBTQ plus community. But outside of that, there's nothing else you can do. You wait. Funny enough, I had someone ask me this very question this week because there's someone that she's very close to who she suspects is queer. And she said, I love him and support him. And I said, well, show him that. In the meantime, you just wait. He'll come to you when he has time. My best friend waited for years. And she knew that entire time, but she waited even when other people went to her and they told her things. She never came to me and confronted me or anything. She waited, and the very moment I told her, the first words out of her mouth were, "I was waiting for you to do this for so long," and that was it. So I mean, that's just my opinion.
Thank you, Christopher. Does any one of the members have to add?
I completely agree with Chris. Don't push them. You can do everything you can to just reassure them that you're a safe and trustworthy person to come out to. But in the end, it's still their decision if they want to come out to you or not. And it's something that they have to grapple with first themselves before they can be ready to come out to other people. And sometimes it does take time. It does take a lot of time for you to go through this.
Let me just mention how excellent I think this discussion is going, because I've had a lot of persons reached out to me on social media because I'm very public about my relationship, and they would reach out saying, I don't know how to tell people. I don't know how to tell my parents. I don't know what to do. And I'm so grateful for sessions like these, and I wish that we can reach to those people, the ones that really, really need it. The second part of this how to respond question is, how should I respond to heterosexual friends or co-workers who feel negatively about a person who is a member of the LGBTQ community?
I see this a lot because I do a lot of gender and sexuality training for service providers like police officers, healthcare workers. And a lot of time, those people, they have negative perceptions about the community. And so moving them from a place where they are hostile to a place where they are more accommodating or more tolerant or more accepting is that we need to address what those misconceptions, what those prejudices are. And so I guess if you have a coworker who is heterosexual and they have negative perceptions or attributes about the community, a good place to start is to dissect what those negative attributes and perceptions are and try to dispel some of those negative attributes and perceptions.
Thank you, Alessandra. Would anyone like to add anything? Okay. The third part of this question is, how can I respond to people who object to LGBTQ people for religious reasons? Spicy topic.
So I guess I'll go first because this is also something that I battle with when I do gender and sexuality training, especially with police officers. You might find that those in the care economy, like nurses, social workers, probation officers, they might be a bit more tolerant, but police officers, I guess because of that macho masculinity that is associated with the military and police complex. But a lot of time they use religion to justify. And what I do is that I first remind them that Guyana is a secular state. It is not a religious state, right? And while they have a right to their religious beliefs and they have a right to practice those beliefs, they have to respect differences because we have to be realistic. Social change is a lifetime process. It takes time. And while we are a part of the LGBT community and we are advocating for social change, we have to also recognize that people
are socialized into their religion, and they hold on to moral and cultural and religious values. And a one-day workshop or a 2-hour session on gender and sexual diversity will not change those values and perceptions and belief that those people have. So what I usually settle for is respect, right? You are entitled to your religious beliefs. You are entitled to practice your religious beliefs. But you have to understand that Guyana is a secular state, and there are differences, there are diversities, and you need to respect those differences and those diversities. That's how I deal with it. But I'd like to hear from my colleagues.
I mean, it's just that, like, I do an exercise where I sort of point, they're saying if you point one finger, there's what, 3 point, well, technically your thumb, I guess, 4 pointing back at you. So I like to do that. Like, anytime that argument comes up, I ask them about their religious beliefs, and I point back to every single thing that they could possibly break from what they talk about. So, everyone likes to quote Leviticus, not knowing Leviticus is an entire chapter that not only crosses off homosexuality, but from what you wear to what you do in your private time and to the relationships you have. And I'm like, then why are you particularly looking at this one line and not looking at the others? But it's not only that, it's, as Alessandra did mention, yes, people, they have this idea of secularism in their mind, but people need to internalize that their religion is personal to them. Their religion applies to them, because I'm religious, but my religion applies to me. As a Muslim, that is entirely what I believe in, and those laws apply to me. But for other people, I can't impose my beliefs on them. And that is a conversation I have with people in the room. I said, it's fine to have your religion, but you cannot treat persons negatively, differently, discriminate, and harass them under the secularism of Guyana, simply because your religion applies to you as an individual, not to the country, your statesmen, the people you're supposed to serve. And that was actually the conversation I had with a group of medical professionals in Linden Region 10. They were on me about when I was talking to them about LGBT patients and patients' rights. And they were like, they feel uncomfortable. What if they harass me? What if, and I can remember oh my gosh, I forgot her name. She was head of adolescent health unit at the time, Dr. Onika something. And she stood up and she said, as long as I'm head of this department, you will not discriminate against LGBT persons simply because you're in the public service. Your job is to help everyone who comes to you for access for healthcare, access and for care. And take your religious belief, apply it to yourself, do it in your own private time, but not when you're under my employ. And the last thing she said is, if you've ever been reported for discriminating and harassing LGBT persons, you will be penalized. And that was just such a stark moment for me that not only did I realize there are actively persons doing something about this, but people will threaten you with their religious doctrine, and then you need to use that. I don't want to say against them, but really that's what it is. You need to use their own religion and just shove it back in their face, which is what I do. So.
Powerful, powerful response from both of you. Thank you so much. So we're on to the third and last round of questions. And this question is going to be shared between Sophie and Christopher. Question is, are there any myths or misconceptions surrounding LGBTQ persons that simply aren't true or are an exaggeration of reality?
I guess I can start first. I've been waiting for this question because this is something that it annoys me. And like, honestly, it annoys me. And I can only speak specifically for like the bisexual experience. But first of all, bisexual people do exist. Like, the being LGBT is not for Backstreet Boys. It's for bisexual. We do exist. No, it's not a phase. No, we're not confused. And no, us preferring one gender more than another does not mean that we're actually straight. Bisexual people are bisexual, even if we haven't dated someone of the same gender, even if we're in a heterosexual relationship, or even if we're not in any relationship. our bisexuality is defined by our attraction to multiple genders, not by our current relationship status. And that's something it just annoys me. There's that, and there's also like people who over-sexualize bisexual women specifically. Like, us being attracted to multiple genders does not mean we're attracted to every single person or that we want to act on those like desires. Like, I'm sorry, but no, I don't want to sleep with you and your ugly boyfriend. I'm so sorry. No, no. There's that, and there's also like the biphobia specifically aimed at bisexual men that I've seen, and it's really horrible because I've seen lots of cishet women who would explicitly express that they would not have a relationship with a bisexual man just because he either is attracted to like other men or has been with other men before, and there's literally no reason other than just internalized or just outright homophobia that you would specifically exclude bisexual men from your dating pool. But yeah, I mean, there's nothing wrong with them. It's just literally nothing wrong with bisexual men other than they sometimes also like men.
Yeah, that's a great place for me to jump right in there, because Sophie made a great point. Well, multiple great points when it comes to bisexuality. The bisexual erasure is something that needs to be addressed, and more than that, it needs to be addressed from within the community, because I can tell you, for bisexual men who have to navigate their sexuality within the community, it's just as bad as the people attacking you. The amount of bisexual men who are told by their gay counterparts that they're not actually bisexual, they're actually gay, they're just saying they're bisexual so that people will accept them more, or bisexuality is just a stepping stone to gayness. Like, I would love that to be addressed. I would love that to be stopped. I would love the community to stop trying to fit people in boxes. I mean, with sexuality in general, I think the community specifically is guilty of it. Just the heterosexuals, the cisgender heterosexual people are guilty, but so are we as a community. We're guilty of trying to tell people what we think they should be. And it's something that needs to be addressed. As far as myths and misconceptions, Sophie touched on one I wanted to mention as well, which is that bisexual women are over sexualized. That's a big one. There's also this myth that gay men and bisexual men, queer men in general, are hypersexual. I mean, on a case by case, individual basis, some of them might be hypersexual, but that's an individual thing. And so many things that I find that so many things that we find within one specific gay person we know somehow becomes commentary on all queer people we know. And I think that that's one of the biggest ways to like address some of these myths and misconceptions, to understand that that one person you're dealing with, that one gay guy you know might be messy, but that doesn't mean all gay guys are messy. I know lots of quiet gay guys. I know lots of gay guys who do like drama. I know lots of gay guys who aren't hypersexual. I know gay guys who are abstinent. But so I think we need to stop taking characteristics of individual queer people we know and applying it to the entire queer community. I think that's the easiest way we can address myths and misconceptions, by just taking every individual queer person we know and letting that person represent themselves and not everyone else. And that applies to me too. Please, 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 please do not think that the characteristics or attributes I have, please do not attribute them to my entire community. I did not sign up to be a representative for my entire community. God knows, I barely want to represent myself sometimes, much less a whole community.
Thank you guys so much for those great points and for clarity on a lot of things. My next question is for Gyro. Gyro, what countries or societies, if any, can Guyana model our LGBTQ laws and policies towards, and why?
Well, none of them, because we're in such a unique position, especially in the region. And you see, that's a debate we have amongst the advocates who do the political lobbying. Because you could look at Suriname, our neighbor to the east, as a prime example. They have no laws that criminalize homosexuality and sodomy, but they still have discrimination in their societies. And they have a lot of discourse there about, policies to protect them, like in the workplace and insurance and all these things. There's no marriage equality. And then that's the same for Curacao. Again, no laws. There's courts in the Netherlands, like they can recognize gay marriages, but there's still discrimination. So we can't exactly model any laws and say we're going to put it in our book. It's not going to solve things, not even in 10 years. What we do need is the policies within education, particularly in community interventions that would address homophobia as it is, and that would really address inequalities. That is not only recognizing LGBT persons as unequal or treated unfairly in society, but actual programmatic plans that would seek to address or alleviate that, why there's we're in such a position. So I really, it's such a profound question. I was thinking deeply on it. And then we see how things can be threatened. You can see how courts can just overturn 50 years of precedents. You can see how courts can just change their minds. You can see how governments can sway their positions. One day they say one thing, and then there are no actions. And we see that a lot in Guyana. I mean, both parties seem as if they would be in favor of legal change, but neither do anything about it. If it was to be called to the House, they'll just say, oh, this is a vote of conscience, so we don't know where that's going to land. And I thought about it, and I answer here that there are no examples that we can look at. And something I find very interesting, particularly in Europe, it's to look at years ago, they changed the laws that still apply to the former colonies like Guyana now. Like they change their laws, we still keep the laws. And then we defend the laws with no ambition to change them at all. So it's not to say that we could change it to anything that's going to work and be practical. And that's our sad reality. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jairo, for that. For the members of the audience, the chat box is open. If you have questions, we'll try to get to all of them before the end. My next question is for Alessandra. So yes, members of the audience, please feel free to ask in the chat box. Alessandra, got 2 questions for you. What kinds of things might a trans person go through when they begin to acknowledge their true gender identity?
Okay, so this is a very subjective question, and the responses would be subjective because it depends on the circumstances. If you are coming from a family that is very supportive and accepting of you being trans, then more likely you wouldn't have issues of internalized stigma or self-stigma, isolation, rejection, discrimination. But if you are now searching for your gender identity and you are navigating or gravitating towards the trans end of the spectrum, and you are from a family or community that is not accepting and supporting, then more likely you will experience self-doubt. You will doubt, because we have to acknowledge that we live in a society where people who are trans and gender non-conforming go against what the status quo established as decent, normal, or acceptable genders, right? So because we are transgressing those boundaries, there will be self-doubt, and that might lead into internalized and self-stigma. And that's internalized and self-stigma is a big issue within the trans community. And this is because oftentimes a lot of trans people don't have the support system. And so the societal level discrimination that they experience from families, in schools, from communities, they internalize that and they give those beliefs life. And so internalized or self-stigma might be an issue. Isolation, rejection, discrimination might be an issue for trans people who are now navigating and trying to find their gender identity. As I said before, it's very subjective. If you have supportive families, communities, supportive teachers and peers, your journey transitioning might be easier compared to someone who does not have that support system in place. Yes.
So true. My next question for you. What are the first steps beside the laws and policies that should be taken to make persons in the trans community feel safe in Guyana?
Right. I love this question. And this is one of the lessons we learned from the McEwen case. So the McEwen case took almost a decade, 10 years. And in 2018, CCJ ruled that it is unconstitutional. PPP went in power in 2021. In August 2021, I think they struck it out of the law book, the Guyanese law book. And even though we would have had those legislative changes from CCJ level and then at our level here in Guyana, those changes did not get rid of transphobia and trans misogyny from our society. Trans people still experience discrimination in different forms. And so we at Guyana Trans United, we always believe in changing hearts and minds. Yes, legislative changes are important, but if we don't address those negative attributes, those negative perceptions and negative behaviors that people have of trans people, or not only trans people, people across the LGBT spectrum, if we don't address those negative behaviors and perceptions, then we are going to have legislations that are inclusive, but then the attitudes of the general Guyanese population would not be supportive of or inclusive of LGBT people. And we can use violence against women as an example, moving the conversation away from LGBT. We are described as a Caribbean country that has quote unquote progressive legislation to protect women, Sexual Offences Act, Domestic Violence Act. But still, every day we see intimate partner violence and intimate partner homicide within our society. That is because we have not been addressing the root cause of gender-based violence and violence against women in our society. And that starts within the home through the process of socialization, where there is unequal gender socialization, where we teach boys that they are dominant and we teach girls that they are submissive. And that leads our children to go up and have an equal gender role. Then when they enter into the employment sector, there is a gender pay gap. So it has to begin at the socialization process from an early age. I hope that sums it up.
Yes, it does sum it up. Thank you so much, Alessandra. And our last question is an open question to the members of the panel. What progress, if any, has Guyana made towards LGBTQ inclusion and integration? I think Jairo would have touched a little bit on this. All of you, as a matter of fact. But what progress, if any, has Guyana made towards LGBTQ inclusion and integration?
I would say dead policies. Dead because Ghana has this weird thing of creating policies to have but not to use. But LGBT persons were specifically mentioned in the DEAD Social Cohesion Plan, in the DEAD Social Protection Strategic Plan. LGBT persons were also mentioned in the 2019 response to the Latin American Caribbean response to the Montevideo Consensus, which protects sexual reproductive health and rights. The government did say that the state itself does not or would not discriminate against LGBT persons. But we do see a lot of challenges with that. But for the state to really at least mention when the rest of the Caribbean does not want to touch on LGBT inclusivity and rights, Ghana at least mentions it, which I always think is just, I don't even have to call it progress, but it's something that you can chisel into to make greater conversations with. And for many points, parliamentarians are open for the discussions. It was something in the last general elections, every party sent a representative to an LGBT forum to speak about their party's plans for it. These things are unknown of in the Anglo-Caribbean. It just does not happen there. So dialogue is important. We've been having that when it concerns inclusivity. And I did mention there's some, like the Ministry of Health would have some forums and workshops where they want to specifically target, well, not target, but to engage their workers on LGBT issues. There's also the Gender Affairs Bureau. I remember when Joel Simpson of SASAD was attacked, the Ministry of Social Protection issued a statement against harassing and discriminating LGBT persons. And I think that was just, I smiled to see something from the government coming out with such wording. But of course, when it comes to the actual concrete changes, then is when things become so, scared of it. And I never ever understand why, because in Guyana, we don't vote on policies and issues. We vote based on how we knew to vote since colonial days. We vote on our ilk, on our kind, because there are many things that come out that would be damning in some political situations. But in Guyana, we don't care when it concerns things like corruption and which party member said what. And an example I always make when I speak to politicians is that Guyana did it before several times. We did shocking legal changes before. Just in 1995, we decriminalized abortions. The party wasn't voted out because of something very unpopular with the people. Yes, they were parading on the streets marching against this. And it happened again in early 2000s when the actual National Assembly, both opposition and government, did vote on including sexual orientation and gender identity as grounds for discrimination in the Constitution. It was passed by the National Assembly. People did come out on the streets. The president refused to sign it, but if he did, it's not to say that we would have voted him out of office, because in Ghana, we don't vote like that. We don't vote on, oh, I don't like that you are in favor of. And as I mentioned, both parties speak relatively favorably of LGBT rights and LGBT persons and not discriminating. But when it comes to the changing the law, then is when they suddenly get quiet. But really the response is you're not going to be voted out for doing this, because Ghana has done it before and you weren't ousted from office. What was the question? I think I answered something, but yeah.
Sorry, the question was about progress. What progress, if any, has Guyana made towards LGBTQ inclusion and integration?
Okay, yes, I answered that a bit when I talked about the dialogue on policies and the CCJ and striking that down. Yeah.
Thank you, Jairo. Would any one of the members of the panel like to add to that? No? Okay, I have two questions from the audience. First question, how can people who strongly disagree with the community due to beliefs pass this belief to their children without teaching them hatred and discrimination for said community? I'll repeat that. How can people who strongly disagree with the community due to their beliefs pass this belief to their children without teaching them hatred and discrimination for said community?
I feel very, I don't know if I'm the only one, but that question confuses me. Okay. I think the answer is you can't. I think that's if you're passing those beliefs on to your children, to say without hate and discrimination, hate and discrimination is inherent to those beliefs. So I don't think that you can pass those beliefs on without hatred and discrimination. You might think it's not overt hatred, but it's like perfect example. There was the argument over pronouns on Facebook. There was, of course, this heated discourse over pronouns. And someone was like, I don't have a problem with trans people. I'm just not gonna call you she just because that's what you asked. And I said, but what would it take from you to just refer to someone how they want? Like a simple pronoun. Like you're going out of your way, pardon my language, you're going out of your way to be an asshole. That's the way I look at it. So it's like, how can you pass those beliefs on without teaching hatred? That you might say hatred and you might mean overt hatred, but it's still hatred nonetheless. It's still discrimination nonetheless. Just because it's not overt, just because it's not aggressive, you're teaching them to judge people based on something you don't understand. And I tell people all the time. Someone said to me, I don't mind gay people. I just don't understand the trans thing. And I said, you don't have to understand. You just have to respect it. I said, I don't understand because, quite frankly, I don't understand what it's like to feel that way. And thank God I don't understand because, quite frankly, it sounds like hell. But I respect it. So, yeah, the answer to that question is you can't.
You know, many times people just don't want to change. They have a belief that's based in their values, and you can talk to them for years, and they're just going to hold on exactly what Christopher is saying with, I don't understand this, and then they put a lot of buts. And I did drop a blog, like an article I wrote about these things are, even if you don't, there's that but. I don't really hate, or I'm not homophobic, but, or, I don't want to think that trans people, but. So there's that but there when it concerns that you actually do hold sort of a prejudice. No, not sort of. You do hold homophobia, hatred, prejudice in your heart. And for these people, you just can't change them. And this is for the young advocates, because this here is a group. The Rotaract Club is a group for social change, environment, future politicians, all these things. And there's something I like to tell the younger advocates. You know, your job really is not to change a generation. It's not going to happen. Don't put that responsibility on you. You're going to get stressed out. Your job is to open an idea, is to share values. At the end of the day, it's if that person wants to internalize them and learn it or not. And most of the times, people do not want to learn. They just want to share their opinion. I always say in this day and age, it's not our responsibility to teach someone when you have the entire resource of knowledge for humankind in just this device. Everything you ever need to know is at the palm of your hand. So people can read up about these things. So instead of me, I remember there was a time I used to be on Facebook comments and be on people. Now I just drop links and be like, if you want to do the research, as you say, you would do the research. Just don't come here and spew your values. So for the young change makers out there, it is, and I see, well, I don't see that. I was having a conversation with a colleague and friend in the chat, Dr. Rambaran, and there's, it's not a sprint, it's a marathon. And we need to pass that on to persons if we want social change. It's continuous. The work is continuous. Even if we get all the laws and policies in the world, it's still happening like Alessandra's talked about violence against women. And it could still happen like what happens in the US concerning Black people. And it could happen like Europe concerning people of color and even LGBT persons themselves. It is a continuous process, and it's not our job to change people's values, but to introduce them really and try for legal and social change.
Thank you so much for your input, guys. Those were some really, really great points. I think you hit it head on. I have another question. How would you go about informing the older generation about what exactly the LGBTQ community is and what it represents? You can repeat the question if you'd like. How would you go about informing the older generation about what exactly the LGBT community is and what it represents?
I think I can start. So I really like what Jara said about like not expecting to change a generation like by yourself, which is really good advice. I'd say just start small. Like you can't expect your parents or your grandparents, if they are currently homophobic, to just switch like that and just suddenly love gay people. start small. Start by trying to get them to at least just respect them. Just be like, yeah, they're not like bothering us or anybody else. Then why are we supposed to hate them if they're not doing anything to us personally? Just start small. Start by educating your parents as much as possible. But again, it is up to them whether or not they actually want to change their minds about something. So at the end of the day, all you can do is just try to educate them and hope that they make the right decision at the end of the day.
Yeah, I just wanted to add there. The older generation, I actually had some first-hand experience here because my mother was not very accepting when I initially came out. And over time, she started becoming more comfortable, but there are a few things that still made her uncomfortable. And she doesn't like the fact that I'm out. She seems to be under the impression that most people aren't very accepting. And so as a mother, she's kind of fearful of me being rejected or hurt. But I tell her all the time that I kind of take it on a case by case basis. I am fortunate and privileged enough to be comfortable with myself. Despite me not being out before, even when I wasn't out, I was always quite comfortable with my sexuality. I never experienced that self-loathing, which unfortunately so many queer people experience. And because I have that privilege, I try to use it. And I know I'm not going to change everyone, but I try to force people to take their ideas or their misconceptions about queer people and reconcile it with how they feel about me. So I've had friends who are very homophobic, and I kind of force them to confront how they feel about queer people with how they feel about me. And I'm very unapologetic about it. Basically, it's either they learn to accept me or they're just not going to have me in their lives. And beyond just accepting me, because I see it too many times where sometimes queer people or sometimes allies will have someone like queer people, let's say queer people in this case, they'll have someone who accepts them, but it's still spewing homophobic vitriol and they won't correct them. And they'll say, you know what, that person loves me, that person accepts me. They're not all bad, but it's then that person's place to educate them. And that's what I do with the people in my life. I tell them that, just because you're accepting of me, that's not enough. I need you to be accepting of my entire community. And I need you to be educated about why the things you say are ignorant and what you should be saying instead. And I had a friend who was very homophobic. When I came out to him, he was pretty much accepting from the beginning. And I made it clear to him that he would not be able to say homophobic jokes. And so, like, I used to let him ride before because I wasn't out, but I'm out to you now. Now you know. And gradually over time, he would come to me and he would say, hey, Chris, is it okay if I say this? Like, I was joking with this guy and I said this. Is that okay? And some of our friends would laugh and say he was doing too much. But what I saw was someone who was trying to change, who was trying to take the fact that they care about me and grow from it and become a better person. And for the older generation, especially, of course, you're not going to change everyone, unfortunately, but you can teach them and you can use the privilege you have, the relationship you have with them to teach them. And I go a step further and I try to educate my mother about like trans issues, for instance, because she used to be very upset with me. She would say, why do you feel the need to talk about trans issues all the time? You're not trans. Like, you're just drawing unnecessary attention to yourself. And I say to her, that's not how things work. Oh, come on. Anyway, ignoring that, I say, that's not how things work. You just don't stand up for a cause or advocate for a cause that only affects you. You have to go beyond that. You have to use the platform you have. And me, as someone who is accepted by so many people, I have a responsibility to take the platform I have and the relationships I have to educate people about why trans women, why trans men, why non-binary people, why everyone in the queer community should be just as accepted as I am. love that they have for me, just like they think I have a right to live and not be bothered by anyone, that should also apply to all my queer siblings, regardless of whether they know them or not.
Thank you so much, Christopher, for sharing, and Sophie and Gyro. Okay, I have a question.
Hi, Brittany, before you go quickly, based on how that question is structured, it kind of set up a dichotomy that queerness is related to young people and the older generation, queerness does not exist there. But I just want to highlight that queerness, people who are gender non-conforming, transgressive, have existed across time and space and across culture. We have newspaper articles dating in the 1970s, 1950s of what is now today referred to as gender-affirming surgery, sex change operation back then, done right at GPHC, same-sex marriage right here in Guyana. And people back then, they were referred to as men in dress and a village divided. That was the headline of the newspaper article. Today, the term we use would be trans or gender non-conforming. So queer people existed, they are all queer people. But I think what happens is that the movement is young-centric, if young-centric is a word. We attract young people who are vibrant and enthusiastic and have the energy to drive the movement. And so sometimes there's an invisibility of older queer folks, but they are older queer folks who are from the older generation. So I just wanted to share that.
Thank you so much, Alessandra. I too have a lot of experience because I'm drawn more to older folks. I like having a discussion with them because it's just so much more interesting for me. Sorry. But I have a question from my fiance. She's a bit shy to ask. She's here in the audience. She is not too liking of the word accepting. What is your opinion on the word accepting?
Okay, I'd like to go from a personal experience here with the word accepting. When I initially came out to my mom, I remember she said something along the lines of, you're walking around acting proud and you're acting like everyone just needs to accept this, like I need to accept this. And I said to her, I think there's been a misunderstanding here. I don't need anyone to accept anything. I accept me, and that's all I ask. I'm just asking that you all not bother me. I said, you're my mother and I love you, and of course it would mean something to me, but the absence of it means nothing. Like, I don't need anyone to accept me because I accept me. And I do take offense to people saying constantly, like, why should we accept this? Like, you don't have to accept anything. You just have to let people live their lives and not bother them. That's all we are. That's all most of us anyway are asking for.
And that is the gay agenda right there. Everyone always talks about what is the gay agenda, you know. But in context, and I'm thinking of Chris and his relationship as well. I did mention earlier that I had to come out like 5 times with my mom, and in different spheres in society and questions, from Jerry, you have gay sex to you and this boy dating, y'all look too close. And that was actually the last time I came out because my boyfriend and I had got an apartment together, and I was spending some nights over there, spending some nights at home, and she wanted to know why. She was like, are you and that guy like dating together? I was like, this conversation again? Yes, mom, I'm gay. And you know, she looked at me and she was like, you know, this is so emotional. She said to me, you're my son, and at the end of the day, I have to love and accept you for who you are. So that whole acceptance word came in. Contextually, I felt very warm about, because that's my mom saying, you know, I'm your mom, you're my son, and I have to accept you, your identity, who you are, who you want to be, what you do, all of these things. And it was so beautiful for me. But as Chris said, you know, accepting and the societal context, totally agree with that too. So it depends on who you really want and of course, what identity you're going to place within being accepted. And if you realize in this conversation, there's no one answer to any of these things. It's all on who you are, which part of the spectrum you fall in, your own experiences with families and friends. It's just so diverse.
And this is thank you guys. This is exactly what I've been trying to share with my friends and family, that joining this discussion, it's not because you know everything or you like to think you know everything about the LGBT community. It's because it's different perspective, it's life experiences. Everybody's experiences is different. I mean, I can't relate to any of you, but that's what makes us. We're all different, you know, and it's good to share things like this, so people would be familiar. If you check the chat box, there are some questions from Otis Chase. I'm sorry we can't unmute you, Otis, but your questions will be answered. Would anyone like to address? And Alessandra, I think one of them is directed to you.
Can you read that question, please?
Activists the world should resist the temptation to litigate, because what happens often is that, no, there was one before that. Okay. A personal opinion on the projected course of the community's social activism in view of the fact that there appears to be a fractured approach now rather than a strong collective approach. Take, for example, the missed opportunity for a greater public information campaign that will now be lost due to the rivalry in Pride Month events. Ooh, I particularly love.
Why was this directed to me?
No, that one wasn't for you. There's another one. Yeah, that one was just to us.
I mean, I think, oh my God, I'm forgetting my feminist. I think it was Audre Lorde who said that community should not mean the shedding of our differences, nor the pathetic pretense that those differences do not exist. And I think that is something that we, as a part of the LGBT community, we have to acknowledge, that there are differences. You're gonna get cis gay men, you're gonna get trans people, but what we need to be aware of is not to engage in oppression Olympics. Oppression Olympics is a social justice term we use where we set up people hierarchically. So we say, okay, cis gay men at the top, you have all the privileges. Then you have cis lesbian women, then you have trans people, then you have intersex people. But as we spoke about privileges earlier, like for example, I have an undergraduate degree. I'm doing my MPhil at UWI. That's a lot of academic privileges there, right? So although I am part of the trans community, I'm a privileged trans person. You might have a gay man who is cisgender, but has experienced family rejection, unemployment, intimate partner violence. So I'm not denying that differences do not exist in our community. Differences do exist in our community, but how do we work to form solidarity across differences? I think that's the key question.
And you find that all over, you know, this is just not unique, because this is again specific to what's going on in Guyana because of Pride and how it seems as if we have two Pride events. Honestly, I remember in my first week of working at an LGBT organization, and the particular portfolio I held, I had to engage another organization. And it was just so tense in the room. Take in mind, this is my first week. And I don't know what's going on, but I could feel the tension. And it came down to how we are viewed. This other organization viewed my organization as one just representing upper class gay men. So they didn't feel represented. And in fact, they actually branched off of our organization as a project, and they became their own entity. They represented well, they won cases my former organization was not able to. All of these things happen because we are a diverse community, and these various groups represent their specific interests. And you look at and I'll list them. You have GAIBO, which looks at the interests of lesbian, bisexual, trans women, GAIBO. And then you have Guyana Trans United, which looks specifically at the relationships, at the interests, at the socio-political affairs, and most importantly, employability and anti-discrimination for trans persons. Then you have SASAD, which is not going to be on the ground because SASAD's programmatic areas focus on legal and political change rather than grassroots campaigns. So you have organizations doing different things and have different priorities. And as Alessandra said, that in itself isn't anything bad. What you need is the cohesion of everyone working together, which we can do better on and we will do better on as a community. But you have to understand we have various priorities. So who is, it's not a competition. It really isn't. It's not. But we can do better in bringing the community, making us more cohesive to our programmatic plans of actions. That's just the answer from me.
Thank you guys so much. Alexandra, I think the question that Otis has for you might be a bit personal, so he might want to reach out to you. I will direct you guys to the chat box because Otis had an input. And because of timing, I will now be closing off questions. Thank you so much for your responses. Thank you guys for having me, and happy Pride Month, everyone. I'll hand you over back to Mr. Hassan.
Thank you, Brittany, for your great job at moderating. Thank you very much.
Hi there again. It is me. Gyro, Alessandra, Christopher, and Sophie, you guys did a phenomenal job answering every question. I don't think your answer could have been any better. I learned so much from you guys. I am 100% positive that everyone in the audience learned something from you today. This was a tremendous discussion. Thank you so much for coming here, for having it with us. Brittany, you did a phenomenal job as moderator. Thank you so much again for doing for this. I don't know what else to say besides thank you. You guys did a phenomenal job. Everyone in our club really appreciates it. Everyone in the audience, I'm sure, really appreciates it. Again, thank you so much. We really genuinely appreciate it. All right. I suppose that would be the official end of our panel discussion today. Again, everyone, thank you again for coming out. We had some minor hiccups, but again, it could not derail the amazing discussion that we had today. So thank you all again. I really appreciate it.
Bye. Thank you for having us.
Take care, everyone.
Happy
Thank you
Bye.
for having us. Bye. Bye, everyone.
Bye,
Alessandra.
guys. Take care.